They called me a legacy expense in a boardroom meeting they thought I'd never hear about. 3 months later, their stock price dropped 40%. They lost their biggest client, and the CEO personally called me, begging to come back. My name became a cautionary tale in corporate America. And today, I'm going to tell you exactly how walking away from a company that didn't value me became the most expensive lesson they ever learned. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting even, it's becoming so successful that your former employer realizes they just made the biggest mistake of their corporate lives. What's up, everyone? If you've ever felt undervalued at work, if you've ever been passed over for promotions you deserved, or if you've ever wondered what would happen if you just walked away from a job that took you for granted, this story is for you. I'm going to share with you the most satisfying career move I've ever made, and how my decision to leave became a masterclass in understanding your own worth. But before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because stories like this, real corporate drama, with real consequences, don't come around every day. Now, let me paint you a picture of where this all began, because the setup is crucial to understanding just how sweet the ending really was. Picture this. It's 2019, and I'm working for what I'll call Megacorp, a Fortune 500 company that prided itself on innovation, but ran on systems older than some of their interns. I'd been there for 8 years, climbing the ladder, putting in 60-hour weeks, and genuinely believing that loyalty and hard work would pay off. I started as a junior analyst and worked my way up to Senior Director of Strategic Operations. Sounds impressive, right? Well, here's what that title actually meant. I was the guy who fixed everything that was broken, implemented every new system, and somehow managed to keep 3 different departments from imploding, while their managers took credit for my work. But here's the thing about being the fix-it person in a large corporation: you become invisible when things are running smoothly, and you become a scapegoat when they're not. I was like the IT guy of business operations. Nobody thought about me until something went wrong, and then suddenly, everyone needed me yesterday. For years, I told myself this was normal. This was corporate life. This was paying your dues. I watched younger, less experienced people get promoted around me while I was told I was too valuable in my current role to move. Translation: we can't afford to lose you where you are, but we're also not going to pay you what you're worth, or give you the recognition you deserve. The breaking point came during the company's optimization review, corporate speak, for we're looking for ways to cut costs and boost executive bonuses. This is where our story really begins, and where I learned that sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of justice. March 15, 2023. I remember the date because it's etched in my memory like a scar. I was walking past the main conference room when I heard my name mentioned through the slightly open door. Now, I'm not usually one to eavesdrop, but when you hear your own name in a meeting you weren't invited to, curiosity tends to override politeness. What I heard next changed everything. Look, Johnson's been here forever. And yes, he gets things done, but he's become a legacy expense. His salary is too high for what we actually need from that role. We can hire 2 fresh graduates for what we're paying him. And honestly, how hard can his job really be if he's been doing it for so long? Legacy expense. 8 years of 60-hour weeks, of solving problems that kept executives awake at night, of missing family dinners and weekend plans. And I was a legacy expense. Not a valuable asset. Not institutional knowledge. Not the person who'd literally saved them millions of dollars over the years. Just an expensive line item they wanted to erase. But here's where it gets interesting. The CFO, bless his heart, asked the question that would eventually cost them everything. What happens if he leaves? Who takes over his responsibilities? The response? How hard can it be? We'll distribute his tasks among the existing team and bring in some junior people. It's not rocket science. Famous last words, right? I stood there for another 5 minutes, listening to them casually discuss dismantling everything I'd built, reassigning my projects to people who didn't understand them, and basically treating 8 years of my life like a subscription service they wanted to cancel. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I didn't storm into that meeting. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't even let on that I knew what was coming. Instead, I walked back to my office and started planning the most strategic exit in corporate history. Here's what most people don't understand about leaving a job. It's not just about quitting, it's about how you quit. And after 8 years of watching this company's operations from the inside, I knew exactly where every pressure point was, every system that depended on my knowledge, and every relationship that relied on my mediation. So I developed what I called the documentation strategy. For the next 3 weeks, while they were planning my termination, I was documenting everything. And I mean everything. First, every process I'd created, modified, or managed, but here's the catch. I documented them just enough to be legally compliant, but not enough to be actually useful. You know those instruction manuals that technically tell you how to assemble something, but somehow leave you more confused than when you started? Yeah, that's what I was going for. Second, I started transitioning my external relationships very carefully. I'd spent years building relationships with key clients, vendors, and partners. I didn't poach or steal that would be unethical and probably illegal. But I did make sure that these relationships knew they were valuable to me personally, not just professionally. Third, I identified every single project, system, and process that would fall apart without my direct involvement. Not because I was irreplaceable. Nobody is, but because I was the only one who understood the interconnections, the workarounds, and the institutional knowledge that kept everything running smoothly. But here's the masterstroke. I also started having very casual conversations with the best people on my team. Not about leaving, I never suggested anyone should quit, but about their career goals, their frustrations, their dreams. You'd be amazed how many talented people are just waiting for someone to believe in them enough to take a chance. The termination meeting came exactly when I expected it 3 weeks later, on a Friday afternoon. Classic corporate move, right? They called it a restructuring, offered me a standard severance package, and asked me to transition my responsibilities over the next 2 weeks. I thanked them politely, declined the severance package, and informed them I'd be leaving immediately. The look of panic in the room was priceless. Suddenly, how hard can it be became wait. You're leaving right now. You know that feeling when you're watching a movie and the villain is about to get their comeuppance, and you're sitting on the edge of your seat waiting for it to happen? That's exactly what the next few weeks felt like. Except I was watching it happen in real time to my former employer. Within 48 hours of my departure, I started getting calls. Not from HR, not from management, but from individual team members who were suddenly drowning in responsibilities they didn't understand. The junior analyst who was supposed to take over my client relations called me in tears because she couldn't figure out why the Peterson account was suddenly threatening to leave. Week 1, 3 critical systems went down because the IT team didn't know about the custom workarounds I'd implemented. The kind of workarounds that aren't in any manual, because they were solutions to problems that weren't supposed to exist, but did anyway. Week 2, they discovered that the quarterly report everyone relied on was actually a compilation of data from 7 different sources, none of which automatically talked to each other. Guess who had been manually integrating all that information every quarter for the past 5 years? Week 3, the first major client called an emergency meeting. Apparently, the transition wasn't going as smoothly as promised, and they were starting to question whether Megacorp could handle their account moving forward. Now, I want to be clear about something. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't delete files or break systems or steal clients. Everything that went wrong happened because they genuinely didn't understand what I actually did all day, every day, for 8 years. You see, this is the thing about institutional knowledge. It's invisible until it's gone. It's not just about knowing how to do the job. It's about knowing why things are done a certain way. What's been tried before, which clients need special handling, and how to navigate the unwritten rules that make everything actually work. But here's where the story gets really interesting, because what happened next wasn't just about my departure. It was about the chain reaction that followed. Remember those casual conversations I'd been having with the talented people on my team? Well, it turns out that when good people watch a company treat their mentor and leader like a disposable expense, they start asking themselves some hard questions about their own futures. Month 2 after my departure, Sarah from business development gave her notice. She'd been offered a position at a startup that actually valued her innovative ideas, instead of just asking her to maintain the status quo. Month 3, Marcus from client relations left for a 40% salary increase at a competitor. Apparently, other companies had been watching Megacorp's talent for a while, and Marcus had skills they wanted. Month 4, the entire data analytics team, 3 people who I'd personally trained and mentored, left within 2 weeks of each other. They didn't plan it together, they just all realized simultaneously that they'd rather work somewhere that invested in their growth instead of taking it for granted. Now, I need to pause here and address something. I didn't recruit any of these people. I didn't encourage them to leave. I didn't offer them jobs or badmouth the company. What I did was show them, through my own actions, that sometimes self-respect means walking away from a situation that doesn't value you. But the exodus wasn't even the worst part for Megacorp. The worst part was what started happening with their clients during this massive brain drain. This is where we get to the number that makes this story legendary in my professional network: $5 million. That's how much my departure ultimately cost Megacorp. And here's exactly how that number broke down. First, the Peterson account. $1.8 million in annual revenue. They'd been with Megacorp for 12 years, and I'd been their primary point of contact for the last 6. When the company couldn't maintain the level of service and personal attention Peterson was used to, they walked. The exit interview specifically mentioned the change in account management quality as the primary reason. Second, the Morrison project. This was a $2.1 million contract that required deep knowledge of both companies' systems and a complex integration timeline I'd spent 2 years developing. Without that institutional knowledge, the project went over budget by 60% and over timeline by 4 months. Morrison not only canceled the contract, but also demanded compensation for the delays. Third, the replacement costs. Remember how they thought they could hire 2 junior people for my salary? Well, they ended up hiring 4 people, plus a consulting firm, plus overtime for existing staff. The recruiting fees alone cost them more than my annual salary would have been. But the real kicker, the thing that made this a true corporate legend, was what happened with the Henderson deal. Henderson Industries was Megacorp's white whale, a potential $10 million contract that I'd been nurturing for 3 years. The relationship was built on trust, technical expertise, and a deep understanding of Henderson's unique needs. 3 months after I left, Henderson's CEO called Megacorp's CEO directly to ask why their dedicated account manager me was no longer responding to calls. When they explained that I was no longer with the company, Henderson asked a simple question: who's taking over the relationship, and do they understand our requirements? The answer, apparently, was not reassuring. Henderson pulled out of negotiations entirely and signed with a competitor where Marcus, my former team member, had just started working and could provide the continuity and expertise Henderson was looking for. That's when Megacorp's leadership realized they hadn't just lost an employee, They'd lost the connective tissue that held multiple critical relationships together. 6 months after they labeled me a legacy expense, I got a phone call that made this entire story worth it. It was 7 p.m. on a Thursday, and the caller ID showed Megacorp's main number. I almost didn't answer. It was the CEO. "Hi, this is Robert Chen from Megacorp. I was hoping we could have a conversation about potentially bringing you back in a consulting capacity to help us through some transitions." I let him talk for about 10 minutes. He explained how they'd restructured some priorities and realized they needed someone with my unique institutional knowledge to help stabilize some client relationships and internal processes. Then came the offer: $150 per hour, minimum 20 hours per week, 6-month contract with possible extension. For those keeping track at home, that works out to about double what they were paying me as a full-time legacy expense. My response was polite but firm. "Robert, I appreciate the call, but I'm actually doing quite well with my current situation. However, I do want to thank you for helping me realize my worth in the marketplace. The experience has been invaluable." The silence on the other end of the line was absolutely golden. So where did this corporate checkmate leave me? Well, remember all those relationships I'd built over 8 years? Turns out, they were more portable than Megacorp realized. I started my own consulting firm specializing in operational efficiency and client relationship management. My first 3 clients? Former contacts from my Megacorp days who followed my work and wanted to hire someone they trusted. Within 6 months, I was earning more than double my Megacorp salary while working fewer hours and actually enjoying what I do. I now have the freedom to choose projects that challenge me, work with people who value my expertise, and build something that's truly mine. But the best part? I wake up every day knowing my worth, not waiting for someone else to recognize it. I learned that sometimes the best career move isn't climbing the ladder, it's building your own. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this story, it's this. You are not a legacy expense. You are not a line item to be optimized. You are a professional with skills, knowledge, and value that extends far beyond what any single employer recognizes. Don't wait for permission to know your worth. Don't wait for a promotion that may never come. And definitely don't let anyone convince you that loyalty is a one-way street. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting ahead. And sometimes walking away from people who don't value you is the first step toward finding people who do. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about navigating corporate America with your dignity intact. And in the comments, let me know, what's the most valuable lesson you've learned about knowing your worth? Until next time, remember, you're not just an employee, you're a professional. Act like it.